It seemed like the plot of a Hollywood thriller.
It's almost like Sting, the movie, where they've got a con game that they're playing.
A dangerous scheme involving 18-wheelers, con artists looking for big bucks, an FBI investigation, high-profile law firms, a disbarred attorney, a stuntwoman turned lawyer, and a federal witness gunned down on his mother's doorstep.
I think it's extremely dangerous.
All the snitches that I know ended up with a bullet in their head.
Answered a doorbell and was murdered in the hallway of his house.
This wasn't scripted in a writer's room. It was real life.
Defense attorneys started connecting the dots and fighting back.
I think we need to get to the bottom of it all.
Now, several key players are convicted felons after a dramatic federal trial, but that only happened years after it burst into public view with our series, Highway Robbery. I'm WWL Chief Investigative Reporter David Hammer. It was November 2019 when my former colleague Mike Perlstein aired the first in his series, Highway Robbery, exposing a scheme of staged accidents that cost you, the drivers of Louisiana, hundreds of dollars a year in insurance payments. It's great to have you here, Mike.
And it's great to be here, especially in light of the recent trial that led to 3 convictions in this sprawling case over all of these 6.5 years.
Yeah, it's amazing that it's been that long since you first broke that story, and we'll talk about that trial coming up. But for now, let's take a look back at your first story from November 2019.
The Danziger Bridge, one of many routes commonly used by 18-wheelers passing through New Orleans East. Take a close look at the accident about to unfold in this video. 3 people said they were hurt when a truck from the local company Triple G Express sideswiped their car. They sued, saying their injuries resulted in more than $100,000 in medical bills. Triple G says it is evidence of a crime that happens regularly in New Orleans, costing drivers throughout the state millions of dollars on their car insurance. But Triple G has been fighting back, installing something the so-called accident victims didn't count on.
A lot of trucking companies are making the investment to put cameras on their trucks. That's self-defense.
This truck's video captured 2 vehicles parked near the foot of the bridge. As the truck maneuvers past them, the vehicles roll in tandem.
Come to find out that both vehicles were involved in it together and planned it. So that kind of tells you the story there.
Seconds after the truck clears them, a second video captures the moment right before impact.
One being involved in the incident fraudulently, intentionally, and the second vehicle, quote, being an innocent bystander.
The plaintiffs in that case didn't know that we had this videotape, and when we took their depositions, everybody in that car denied that they had stopped on the bridge.
After a year of court battles, accident attorney Daniel Patrick Keating and his law firm, Nugent Keating, withdrew from the case. After seeing the video, the plaintiffs abandoned their claim.
Those cameras right there saved somewhere between $150,000 and $250,000 just by capturing the fraud and us not having to go forward to defend it.
Baton Rouge attorney Doug Williams represented the trucking company. He says this is just one example of a rash of accidents being staged by a connected circle of con artists, fake fender benders that contribute to Louisiana's high insurance rates.
There are the ones we all run into time and time and time again in New Orleans.
2 weeks ago, the U.S. Attorney's Office indicted 5 people for insurance fraud in an almost identical case.
That they have pulled these pieces together and that the information continues to grow. And hopefully a lot of people will be held accountable for this.
And now, Mike, we have had people held accountable with 3 guilty verdicts. And, you know, for people who haven't followed this as closely as you have, of course, over the many years, but even the trial that we saw over 3 weeks, maybe you could give us a quick overview of that and talk about some of the key players.
Absolutely, and let's start with those 3 verdicts by a jury after a 3-week trial. That was the first trial, and these are the first jury verdicts in a case that has now topped 50 convictions total. So that just gives you the scope and breadth of this scheme. What was interesting was that at the time we started these stories in 2019, you're hearing from some of the defense attorneys for trucking companies and insurance companies. They had been fighting this, seeing the patterns, seeing the red flags for a couple of years. They came to me, we gathered all the information. I started charting those suspicious accident lawsuits and started coming to the same conclusions. Simultaneous with that, the federal authorities, led by the FBI, were also putting the pieces together. And in 2019, we aired our series, Highway Robbery, and we saw the first indictment drop. Who knew at that point that that was just the tip of the iceberg?
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about the story behind your stories. You talk about how these attorneys contacted you, you started charting them. Tell me a little bit more about that.
In this case in Louisiana, it's pretty ripe for the pickings. All 18-wheelers are required to carry a minimum of $1 million insurance that makes them targets for would-be fraudsters to intentionally sideswipe the back, I guess, driver's blind spot of those trucks. In fact, the FBI dubbed their investigation Operation Sideswipe. And what the defense attorney started seeing after many, many settlements, and it's usually a business decision by these companies, the trucking companies and the insurance companies, to go ahead and settle rather than drag into litigation that could go on for years and maybe lead to an expensive trial. But after a certain point, seeing the same names involved in these lawsuits, the same location of New Orleans East over and over again, and in the case of some of the key players that were eventually named in indictments, Damien LeBeau in 5 accidents. What are the odds that a single person is going to be in not just 5 accidents, but 5 almost identical accidents sideswiping an 18-wheeler? Yeah. And that's when the attorneys and their investigators prevailed on the insurance companies to say, look, to put a stop to this once and for all, let's push back. And they started filing what's called counterclaims in court, laying out some of these discrepancies, these red flags. That's what I started charting, case by case. I think at one point I had more than 60 cases mapped out. And then I started seeing the connections beyond just the same people, family members, neighbors in the same apartment complex. Clearly, it was a case of massive fraud. And when I took this to our news director at the time, Keith Esbros, I said, this is a massive scheme. The FBI is deep into this, well over a year and a half of investigation. It's charted out in these counterclaims, in these lawsuits. Let's go as strong as possible. Let's call this highway robbery because crimes occurred, and that's going to be proven in court. And here we are, more than 50 convictions later.
Well, and it's amazing that such a small group of people that you then started seeing the patterns and the investigators did the same could cause so much trouble for so many of us, anybody who drives in the state of Louisiana. And you took a look at that in 2023 with your next story.
It's unacceptable, it's unaffordable, and like I said, I don't want Louisiana to be the state that's identified as, oh, let's go practice fraud in that state.
That's Louisiana Insurance Commissioner-elect Tim Temple talking about the estimated $600 a year that all Louisiana drivers pay for insurance due to staged accidents and the bogus lawsuits that follow. Operation Sideswipe, the sprawling 5-year federal investigation that exposed more than 100 intentional accidents with 18-wheel trucks, was supposed to curtail the fraud. But even though 52 people were indicted, 44 of them pleading guilty, only a single attorney has been charged so far.
They need to be held more accountable than somebody who was a passenger in a car.
Those passengers and the street-level organizers of the scheme known as slammers have been cooperating with the feds. But prosecutors' efforts to implicate attorneys has run into major roadblocks. First, a slammer-turned-federal witness, Cornelius Garrison, was fatally shot when his indictment was made public. And many of the attorneys under scrutiny for filing false claims hired their own criminal defense lawyers, and those lawyers didn't wait for indictments. They went on the offensive. Here's a clip of a tape recording that was shared with prosecutors in which one confessed slammer, Damien LeBeau, is talking to accident attorneys he referred cases to.
I can guarantee you, all my life, there ain't nothing to turn with you no fraud, put me under no, it ain't no fraud, nothing I ever done.
I don't know if there are a whole lot of smoking guns for them to climb up the ladder.
Personal injury attorney Edwin Shorty Jr. knows the federal case well. In 2017, he filed an accident lawsuit for 3 people who claimed they were hit by a truck on I-10. This August, just before the statute of limitations ran out, those 3 people were indicted, accused of staging the accident. Long before anyone heard about Operation Sideswipe, the trucking company in that case began raising suspicions and vigorously contested Shorty's lawsuit in court. At first, he plowed ahead.
If the insurance company denies the claim or has a problem with the claim, does that really give me a concern? No, because insurance companies are in the business of denying claims.
But when the Fed started charging people, Shorty got off the case.
So there we see that it's not just the trucking companies and the insurance companies that are being hurt. It was costing all of us.
The impact of this was huge, and that was one of the major elements when we first started this. We were very quick to go to the insurance commissioner at the time, Jim Donnellan, who put the cost of the fraud at $600 each year for everyone's insurance policy, just to pay for the fraudulent settlements resulting from these staged accidents.
And what was the difficulty in talking about things from the perspective of the law firms? It was really difficult to get to the issue of the law firms. You say in that story that only one lawyer had been charged at that point.
Well, what was pretty remarkable and an element of the coverage in which I'll just say WWL got way ahead of the case. We started naming names of these attorneys, many of whom were on case after case, almost identical sideswipe accidents with trucks long before any of these attorneys were even indicted. For example, Vanessa Mata, they were one of the things that allowed us to come right out and start to name the names of the attorneys like Mata was 10 of these lawsuits were stayed, halted by judges due to, quote, ongoing criminal investigations. Of those 10, 5 of them were Vanessa Mata cases. So that was a clear signal that her cases were being scrutinized by the FBI and U.S. Attorney. And that enabled us to connect the dots, to name these names. It wasn't for several years later that they were actually first named by the government in an indictment.
In a Blockbuster federal indictment, that investigative reporter Mike Perlstein reported earlier today 2 more accident attorneys and their law firms have been charged in a massive insurance fraud case.
Yeah, it involves people intentionally crashing into 18-wheelers in order to collect millions from bogus lawsuits based on fake injuries. Here's Mike Perlstein with today's dramatic developments in the investigation we call highway robbery.
Despite 49 earlier guilty pleas among 52 previous defendants, the 5-year-long federal investigation into accidents staged for insurance fraud seemed incomplete, with only one attorney accused so far in the sprawling case. Until today.
You know, I applaud the U.S. Attorney's diligence in the pursuit of justice. That's what we're supposed to look at.
For years, WWL Louisiana has named attorney Vanessa Mata and the King Law Firm as potential targets in this massive fraud case. Well, today, those targets became defendants in this indictment. Not only are the law firms indicted, but Mata herself, along with her fiancé and alleged middleman Sean Alfordish, as well as attorney Jason Giles of the King firm. 4 other low-level defendants also were indicted, accused of being among those involved in the scores of accidents and millions in settlements of bogus lawsuits.
It's almost 10 years here, and now we see Vanessa Mata, Jason Giles, these were actual attorneys who were charged with crimes. Why do you think the jury found the way they did in this trial that just ended the 3-week trial?
Well, I can tell you that the trial, and I dipped in and out of it, and I saw the key witnesses on that witness stand, and I saw 6 years of my reporting life just flash before my eyes in that court. It was a remarkable prosecution in that it was 6 years of compiled evidence and witnesses. The parade of the witnesses on that stand included that first attorney, Daniel Patrick Keating, who pleaded and agreed to testify. He did. Damian LeBeau and a couple of other slammers who were the ones who were behind the wheel, hitting the trucks, coordinating with attorneys, rounding people up to put them in that car to file the fraudulent lawsuits. And then the people who packed into the cars themselves also testified. One woman got a surgery when she was not even injured, just to increase her payout at the urging of these attorneys. So that, in the end, as I'm watching this jury over the course of 3 weeks, it wasn't the most blockbuster criminal, trial of Perry Mason moments, but it was just this brick by brick mountain of evidence. And ultimately, we did see the defense attorneys and those investigators first uncovered this. Let's give them credit. They're the ones who basically brought this to the feds on a silver platter. That scope and range of witnesses all saying exactly the same thing turned out to be convincing, at least beyond a reasonable doubt, to this jury.
Well, and the scheme is like something out of a Hollywood movie, and I saw people reacting to the coverage with amazement. People were really following this trial in a way that you don't see often in criminal trials. What was the mood in the courtroom?
Oh, it was heavy and dramatic. Like all trials, there was, just sort of the legalese, and in between, though, the witnesses who took that stand were nothing short of absolutely dramatic. And you could tell this jury was riveted. You had two locally renowned accident attorneys on trial. They had been named by us in multiple stories and flat out denied for years that they had anything to do with anything fraudulent. They strongly defended themselves all the way up to the point of trial. When you saw, for example, Damien LeBeau, career criminal, did time for manslaughter, you heard his audio tape.
Right.
That was a secret recording by the King firm that they presented initially to the U.S. attorneys. Like, you can't prosecute us. Look at your own star witnesses saying, ain't no fraud. Yeah. That tape recording, an attempt to get the U.S. attorney to stand down, turned out to be an obstruction of justice charge added to the indictment. That was a plot twist. I mean, it was almost, as you said, like a kind of a TV movie with all the dramatic twists and turns. And of course, we all know that the darkest turn of all was the murder of a federal cooperating witness, Cornelius Garrison. Some year after we first started airing our stories, it was already a mind-blowing story in terms of the scope, the cost to just individual drivers who have to pay this extra insurance to cover fraud. Then to have that key witness 4 days after he's indicted, murdered. And we all suspected he was telling his own defense attorney at the time how he feared for his life. He had been wearing a wire, we came to find out, that was recorded and played at trial. We heard basically Cornelius Garrison speaking from the grave, basically. Even then, that remained unsolved and no official, indictment or charges against the people allegedly responsible for the killing for another 4 years. Yet we continued to report that, hey, this is a federal witness. The FBI sent in a team from Quantico, Virginia. That's when we knew that this was more than just a normal sort of garden variety New Orleans murder.
A man accused of killing a federal witness in the massive case that's exposed millions of dollars in fraudulent insurance payouts from staged truck accidents was ordered held without bail as a danger to the community today.
48 people have pleaded guilty in the scam so far, and investigative reporter Mike Perlstein has covered this case extensively in his series Highway Robbery. Now, with the case expanding, Mike was in court for a dramatic detention hearing that resembled a mini trial.
Fights over illegal profits from fraudulent truck accident lawsuits. The FBI tracking burner phones. A man lured by a woman into a barrage of gunfire. Those were among the details presented by an FBI agent in federal court Friday against Ryan Harris, accused of gunning down a federal witness.
It is a circumstantial case, and there's a lot of what I would call death by 1,000 cuts.
Harris, along with Giovanna Gardner, are accused of conspiring in the 2020 murder of Cornelius Garrison, an accused fellow scammer who was secretly cooperating with the feds. The FBI agent testified before Judge Michael North that agents tracked Harris's cell phone to the murder scene at the exact time Garrison got a text message from Gardner posing as another woman.
At best, there's very circumstantial, specious evidence about cell phone tracking. We disagree with the judge's conclusion that it was strong.
Harris's attorney, Christopher Morrell, unsuccessfully argued that the evidence doesn't outweigh his client's previous clean record. Harris's family and supporters packed the courtroom, and when Magistrate North ordered his detention, a couple of them began openly weeping.
You can see by the reaction of his family coming out of court that he and the people who testified on his behalf, he's somebody who is has no felony record and somebody who I believe, as we argued, deserves release.
Gardner, the mother of Harris's 4-year-old child, also is being held without bail. Ryan Harris, who was involved in plotting that murder, has pleaded guilty to that and is serving 35 years.
Well, let's take a listen to what prosecutors had to say after the trial with this report from WWL's Kai Naveau.
After 3 weeks of testimony, the trial for Vanessa Mata and Jason Giles wrapped today with Judge Wendy Vitter ordering both to be taken into custody inside of the courtroom. The case, which WWL Louisiana investigators broke in 2019, centered on staged collisions with 18-wheelers. Mata, Giles, and their respective law firms were convicted of conspiracy to commit mail and wire fraud, multiple mail fraud counts, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice.
Insurance fraud is not a victimless crime. It is a crime that destroys businesses, impacts lives, and disrupts our society.
First Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Simpson praised the jury's verdict Friday, saying Mata and Giles must now face the consequences of their actions.
To me, this is a glaring example of what happens when lawyers push the boundaries in a way that it was never intended by the Code of Ethics or the Code of Professional Responsibility.
Prosecutors say Mata and Giles paid so-called slammers to intentionally crash into tractor trailers so they could file lawsuits and collect large settlements. Giles' attorney argues her client did not know what was happening.
And I think everyone in the city thought that those who were involved needed to be punished, and I understand that. The difference for me is that I believe that my client did not know what was happening in those cases.
Meanwhile, Mata's attorney says the fight is not over. You said this is not over. Can you expand on that?
Well, she's not been sentenced and she has a right to an appeal, so there's more steps to come.
So there will be an appeal?
Yes, I'll be filing a notice of appeal.
And now, Mike, we know that there is an appeal in this case.
Another remarkable element of this whole thing is that Vanessa Mata and Jason Giles were taken into custody immediately upon these guilty verdicts. So while this appeal process unfolds, they will do so from prison.
Yeah, it's not just the appeals, of course. There's more to come because Cornelius Garrison, a federal witness who was cooperating with the FBI, was killed, and now there's going to be a murder trial. So let's take a look at your coverage of that, Mike.
All the snitches that I know ended up with a bullet in their head.
Amir Baraka knows the dangers of a criminal life. Now a successful actor, he did time in prison. He's seen what happens to suspects who flip to become government witnesses.
They rat, and then they get killed because they don't give them any protection. Or they go to prison and get their brains stomped out.
Cornelius Garrison had been secretly cooperating for months with the FBI in the massive fraud case involving dozens of accidents staged for insurance fraud. After Garrison was publicly named in an indictment with 8 others on Friday, he lasted 4 days before he was murdered. Even though Garrison lived in this relatively quiet and peaceful neighborhood in Gentilly, he explicitly told his defense attorney that he feared for his safety.
I think it's extremely dangerous.
Veteran criminal defense attorney Craig Mordock said defendants frequently ask about witness protection.
Just personally, I've had a few clients who have asked to be in witness protection, and the general reaction from the U.S. attorney or the FBI is just sort of a shrug of the shoulders.
New Orleans has a history of being especially dangerous for suspects who flip.
You're going to cross paths because it's such a small city. So you put yourself in a very, very dangerous situation. And again, the feds will not protect you.
The FBI has joined the NOPD in the Garrison murder investigation, but for now, the case remains unsolved.
And at that time, the murder was not yet solved, but now we have a trial coming up in the summer of 2026.
That's right, and this goes back to the murder of Cornelius Garrison on the doorstep of the apartment he shared with his mother. He had been secretly cooperating with the FBI, and now 2 people have been named as responsible for that murder.
And who are the defendants in that case?
And that would be Sean Alfordish, fiance of Vanessa Mata, accused of ordering the hit, and the alleged triggerman, Leon Parker, nicknamed Chunky, accused of being the triggerman.
Yeah, and you know, Mike, you followed this from the very beginning, every step of the way, and we here at WWL are going to continue to cover this as we lead up to that trial. You're going to want to follow us on TV at WWL, as well as online at WWLTV.com and on our streaming app, WWL+. But for now, for former WWL investigative reporter Mike Perlstein, I'm WWL Chief Investigative Reporter David Hammer. Thanks for watching.